So today we're checking out the final song off of the Iron Maiden debut album. This is Iron Maiden. So, 1980, I think, is when this came out. And checking this up again. A couple of different things to talk about from this album. First of all, I've heard this song probably, I don't know, 150, 200 times. I believe it gets played live quite a bit. But I've only heard, again, Bruce singing it. So this is new for me. I'm really enjoying Paul's voice. I haven't gotten into anything yet that has given me a better understanding as to what created the Bruce Dickinson era. Obviously, Paul was in the band originally. I think he's a great fit for the band vocally, for what they've done, written, so on and so forth. So I'm sure that we will find that out as we kind of continue the journey and get used to that story. But one of the things I learned about this album was that Dennis Stratton, actually, this is the only album that he played on. So he was second guitarist behind Dave Murray on this specific album. Creative differences, he basically was trying to change the sound of the band, and they weren't having that, so off he went. One thing that I've noticed I've noticed a little bit more in the past couple of songs that I've done from this album, is they've always done the dueling guitars, right? Matching harmonies, so on and so forth. I commented on it during my last video as well. They do a really good job, even though they only had 13 days to produce this album, of not only doing the harmonization with the guitars, but somehow maintaining a completely different tone on both guitars. I don't know how much of that was just created tone in the studio versus just the way that it was mixed. More than likely, considering when this was recorded, it was probably just genuine tone in the studio, and that's how they were able to achieve that. But they not only just handle harmonization of the guitars, but they do a great job also offsetting those tones. There's some other cool little tidbits we'll talk about here as we go through the song and as we conclude this first Iron Maiden album. Now you got to think about when this was actually recorded and released. There's a lot of great rundowns and things like that happen now in music and metal, but at this point in time, with writing and styles and everything that had been brought into the world of metal, that rundown was pretty damn fantastic and amazing. Just a total switch of the energy of the song at that point in time, which that rundown really helps accomplish. I don't know that it was being done a lot at that point in time or not. I have a feeling it probably wasn't necessarily like a complete breakthrough thing that happened, but I may be wrong. I don't feel like it was being done by everybody, that's for sure, and it was just a really cool way to transition and make a change in the song, something that metal has always done really well. This. This is just raw. I actually went and I couldn't find any of the official Iron Maiden releases, so I found somebody else that had the studio version. So my understanding is this is, and I feel like we're hearing it. It definitely doesn't have that remastered touch. Just it's like when the, I don't know that this for a fact happened per se, but it almost sounds like with editing, mixing, whatever they did at that point in time, you can kind of hear the whatever mic was miking the snare drum. Was closed at one point in time, and as he's getting ready to strike it, I feel like you can almost hear the gate or noise gate or whatever was in use at this point in time. You can hear it come off, and you can hear not just the drum, but you can hear like the whole room in the microphone. Let's listen to that again just to see if I can pick up anything more from it. If you're a drummer and you were around back when this was released and you were a kid and you know more about this than I do, please feel free to tell me anything you know about that. But I feel like I'm just hearing a massive part of the room. Maybe it's even being picked up from a couple of other microphones that are probably around, and it just didn't, get the modern day treatment of editing because you just didn't have it back then. Maybe it's just the guitar coming back in too, but it's just a really cool element to me when you think about time and space and where this was recorded and when it was recorded and what era of time this was recorded and so on and so forth. I like catching little tiny details like that. And in songs like this that I've heard, 100 times, I don't have as much to pull from lack of knowledge from the song because I know it. But hearing little tidbits and details like that as we celebrate the end of this album, it's fun for me. There's some really cool lead work being injected in there, and it's just these kind of, they're not ad-libs per se, but more of like interval parts, so I feel like they're in between his vocals. You're catching these little lead breaks that he's doing in there. Yeah, there was 3 of them in there, and they kind of just, they weren't when the space was empty. They started as he was still singing, and then they carried forth into the next line. Nice little connectors. Just, I don't know. You never know what's going to stick out to me in these songs, but those were just nice little connector notes to me. Let's hear them again. Wherever you are, I'll be there. Gotta get you, no matter how far. Sit above room, watching this shit above my head. I'll be there, watching my That was the Iron Maiden. That was Iron Maiden's first full studio released album. which included Sanctuary, which I know was not on the original release, and then I believe it was released as a single. Then it was officially added to the United States or North American copy, and I might be getting some of this wrong, guys, but I'm just kind of scroll through Wikipedia here as we look at some of this stuff, just to kind of recap this album. So share all your stories in the comments, man. I love reading them, especially those of you that were, I found metal when I was like 14 years old. I don't know when you found metal, or I'm assuming that this was this called metal back then? Like, to those of you who just got completely offended by that question, my apologies. I know it was the British heavy metal movement, NWO, BHM. I don't know if it was there yet. Here's what I don't know is I don't know what this was called before it came out. So as this was getting released, how was it getting marketed to you guys? Was it getting marketed as fresh, new heavy metal, new British heavy metal? How were they marketing it as it was getting released? Not how they talk about it now, not how they talked about it 4 or 5 years later. Like, what was the marketing you were getting? How was this getting presented to you? What kind of mindset, mood, all that stuff were they trying to relate? Because, graphically, let's just talk about this. This is the start of the Iron Maiden journey, right? Graphically, and I apologize, I haven't seen anything yet that tells me who did artwork on the album or anything. So some of you probably know that. But, yeah, graphically, like, this could be on an album today, and I would think this is going to be absolutely brutal. It's going to murder me. Back then, if this came out, did you walk away from that going, oh my God, that was brutal? Because I can almost see hearing this back then as a kid and going, the artwork didn't necessarily match the look. But again, I was alive, but I was very young back then. So these are not naive questions. These are really questions I hope that'll inspire you to feel free to share what you were hearing. If you were in Nebraska, or if you were over in Germany, or wherever you were at this point in time in life in 1980 as this was getting marketed to you. I'm just kind of curious, commercial-wise, like, how were you hearing about this? Was it in the magazines? Were they marketing it as metal? Were they marketing it as brutal? Were they marketing it as, neat classical? What I don't know how else they could have possibly marketed it, but I know what we call it. I know what I called it when we were coming up, but I mean, this is 1980. Wasn't a lot of this around, right? I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but there wasn't a lot of it at this point in time, so it was pretty new. So what'd they call it for you? Was it just metal? Was it heavy metal? British heavy metal? Like, how did they really portray this to you? How'd they get this in your hands? This was pre-MTV. I want to hear all those stories, the concert stories, all that cool stuff, because I remember being at that inspirational point in time in my metal journey about 8 years after this came out, actually. And yeah, it's great to kind of reminisce back on those things. So was this your first metal album ever? Was this your first experience with metal? How much money did you have to save up mowing lawns and washing cars and things like that to go buy this album? How'd you get your hands on your first copy? Was it all vinyl back then? It's like, dude, this dude is just railing. Well, it's the end of the album, man. I'm asking a ton of questions because I really don't know, and these are all the little tiny things that you kind of come across. And there's a lot of you super fans out there that were growing up during this time period. Was it still vinyl? Was it cassette yet? I don't know when that stuff happened. All my first music was on cassette, but it was pretty new. Cassette was pretty new. I have a brother who's 12 years older than me, and another one that's 15 years older than me. So in 1980, they would have been, man, I was 3, so they would have been 13, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in that range. My brothers really never listened to Maiden, but they listened to Kiss and some other stuff that I wouldn't really put into this Maiden category. So anyways, that's my brain dump, guys. Answer whatever you like in the comments. I know there's another song that came in between this album and the next one, which I believe is Women in Uniform. It was a single that was put out on I don't remember if it was a mixtape or something. I'm sure that you'll remind me again in the comments, but we're going to get to that. But with this being the end of the album, I just wanted to have a little kind of knowledge dump here from the few things that at least stuck out for me. Did you know that there were 3 producers on this album? The final producer, they pretty much just let him walk away, and Steve was like, we're just going to handle this ourselves. One of the producers that they brought in for this. Let's see, make sure I get his name correct. Andy Scott was dismissed after insisting that Harris play his bass with a pick rather than with his fingers. So what was happening then? It's 1980. You're loving some Iron Maiden, and Steve Harris comes out and he's killing it with a pick, or without a pick. He's killing it with the fingers. Was that new at that point in time? Were they trying to get him to do that because everybody from bass was switching over to a pick? Did they not like, the air in between? I mean, also, if they ask a bass player to play with a pick that normally doesn't, were they trying to simplify him? Were they not wanting him to be out in front of the mix as much as he is and be considered that third or fourth guitar in the band? I'm just kind of curious if anybody knows some of the backstory around that, because I'm sure there's way more to that story. But yeah, I guess this guy wanted him to play with a pick, and they knew what they wanted. They went through multiple producers. They got rid of Dennis as fast as they could, apparently, after they handled recording and tour. And they knew what they wanted to be. They knew when they wanted to be it. They knew where they wanted to be it at. And they stuck to it, and they're Iron Maiden. One of the biggest, if not maybe the biggest metal band of all time, even. I don't officially know the numbers, but God, they're Iron Maiden. There's not a lot of people that exist that don't know that Iron Maiden exists. I've got a 15-year-old daughter right now. She's never heard Iron Maiden other than being around me, but I promise you she knows they exist. I've probably got an 8-year-old nephew that I could probably ask him if he knows about Iron Maiden, and he'd probably know they exist. They're a big enough band to be known by 90% of the world. And the other 10% of the world are just ignorant, or they just don't have connection to outside society. That's how big Iron Maiden is to me. Another thing I picked up from this album was Paul. I'm going to try to pay attention as we get into more of the Bruce Dickinson stuff. I feel like Paul's got more grit in his voice. Paul's got a little bit more of a natural distortion. And that was kind of a sound of that time and era, right? And I go back to like a Bon Scott, that type of dirty, raspy vocal. And those are my points of reference. I'm sure you guys have some better and deeper points of reference from people in that era that were really had that nice, gritty, just distorted kind of tone. Throw them in the comments. I'll check them out at some point in time. I'm just kind of curious. Those are my only points of references. But I'm gonna pay attention as we move forward with the Iron Maiden journey, because I'm very familiar with Bruce, but now listening to them both, I feel like Bruce doesn't have as much of the grit and so on and so forth. I'm probably wrong about that. I'm sure he pulls it off, and I just never really listened to it. But Paul's definitely got kind of a natural, just little distortion, almost like he's got a little PV speaker in his throat, and you can press that dirty distortion button and it just changes for him. I really like it. I think Paul did well. I'm curious to learn more about the story about why Paul's not in the band. I genuinely don't know any of that history because I am a child of Bruce Dickinson, who I would say is more of a classical, theatrical performer and singer. So those are my varying differences after listening to this album straight through. And I'm listening to no other Iron Maiden right now, to be honest with you. This is it. So I'm kind of a full album in going, yeah, Paul's this. He's really good. I think he fit real well with the band. He fit well with the sound of that time, and considering other bands that I know of during that time. I feel like there's just that little difference between those two for sure. Bruce is more of the theatrical, clean style, I don't know, classical type vocal, whereas I think Paul just he's clearly got some personality to his voice. I liked it. And I don't want to get too far down the Paul Bruce train just because there's more albums we're going to go through. I'm going to get more of the story and so on and so forth. But I'm sure there are some of you that went through from the Paul to the Bruce switch. I've been through some bands that have moved singers. I'm usually not a very big fan of that when that happens. Every now and then there's some magic that comes out of it. I'm trying to think of one. Anthrax. Loved Persistence of Time and just that entire era of Anthrax. And then we get the John Bush era, which I didn't hate. I actually, The Sound of White Noise, that entire album to me is one of my favorite albums, even though I still prefer Joey in Anthrax over John, but it's still fantastic to me. So just I'll start asking more questions like this as we get closer. If you want to share, feel free to, please. But I'm just kind of curious what you guys all went through. Like, this is the 80s. It's early 80s. this is getting released to you? How are you hearing about it? Where'd it come from? What are they calling it? How are they marketing it to you? I can imagine just how exciting this music must have seemed back in like 1980 when it was fresh and coming out, and not a lot of bands were attacking with the speed and the ferocity that, Iron Maiden was at this point in time. Great album. I knew a few of the songs off of it, so clearly it's got some staying power because Bruce is still singing them live today. Man, not only that, just their style. I mean, there's so much from Iron Maiden and their stylistic of play, the galloping guitars, the harmonizing, dueling, if not even triple threat, 3 guitars going at one time. I mean, so much of Iron Maiden's style that was right here in 1978, 77, when they were dicking around and writing this stuff, and they finally got it all recorded, I mean, that was their style then. It's not a whole lot damn different now. They knew who they were, what they wanted to be, when they wanted to be it, and where they wanted to do it at. And for that, they are indeed the Iron Maiden. I'll catch you on the next album, guys. This is fun.